Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of June of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And we're going to start with Orekhov bridgehead. As you can see, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours made a lot of attempts to attack the Russians, and the main clashes took place in the vicinity of Piatykhatky. Currently, the Russians have provided another video of fierce battle in that settlement. Basically, according to the Russian sources, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians control this settlement. The Ukrainians were forced to step back to the north, but it doesn't mean that the Russians established control of their settlements. No, basically the Russians went to the south of that settlement and the Ukrainians left the settlements in direction of north, and every single day the Ukrainians make another attempt to enter the settlement to establish control over some buildings, fortifications, and from the Russian side they start bombing and shelling the settlement, and after that they send the clearing squads and clearing teams. When talking about, for example, Rybar, the Russian military experts, he reported that the control over Piatykhatky was returned to the Russians, but as I understand, this is not correct information, at least at 3 p.m. of the local time. I assume and I believe that this settlement is in the gray zone and neither control this settlement. Furthermore, the Russians, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce clashes and fightings in this area, the Ukrainians lost 200 soldiers, 30 armored vehicles, including 8 tanks. Not just in Piatykhatky, these numbers include the losses of Ukrainians in Orekhov bridgehead and of course on the Vremevka tactical bridgehead as well. The only thing that we got for sure, or at least we can be sure about this piece of information for more than 60%, is that the Russians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to return control over these fields, over this defense line. If you remember, a few days ago we have updated this territory, but currently just this morning we got some confirmation that the Russians managed to push the Ukrainians from these fields. Of course, we will wait for a little bit to get more reliable information that we can trust. The Russians reported that during the day the Ukrainians were trying to send some reserves to Kupiansk and some reserves through Kupiansk in direction of Lobkov and Piatykhatky, but all those reserves and those convoys got under Russian artillery attack, and the Russians reported they managed to destroy those forces who were heading in direction of Piatykhatky. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that they managed to destroy the headquarters of 128th Brigade, and basically 128th is the main forces, is the main brigade that currently attacks and trying to establish complete control over Piatykhatky. Furthermore, the Russians reported that they destroyed the ammo depot 44th Artillery Brigade, and 44th Artillery Brigade is the main artillery brigade that located on Orekhov front line, which supports the Ukrainian forces in their greatest counter-offensive operation. Of course, the Ukrainians don't have a lot of artillery brigades. The main artillery brigades were redeployed in direction of Kupiansk and Lyman and in direction of Vremevka tactical bridgehead. So the losses of ammo depot 44th Artillery Brigade is a very big loss for the Ukrainians. Now let's talk about Bradley Square. Today we got a lot of very interesting updates from this territory. The Russians published another video how the Ukrainians using armored vehicles were crossing the fields, and at some point the armored vehicles got on the minefield and was destroyed. Another interesting photo we got from the Russian sources. This is the satellite photo of this area. On this picture you can see Rabotin on the south, so we can see Novodanilovka on the north, and we can see Malotokmachka on the east. So as you can see, this is the satellite photo, and as you can see there is some areas that are colored in red. These red massive dots on this photo. These red dots means the areas of massive fightings and artillery attacks. So as you can see, based on this photo, as this photo was provided by the Russian sources, the Ukrainians couldn't even bypass their gray zone, or at least territory that considered as the territory in the Ukrainian control. So you can see there are just few red lines to the south of green line. Green line is the combat line. Basically it's something like a front line, and as you can see, just a few lines, red lines, managed to bypass the green line. So basically most of the Ukrainian losses took place along the road, and in the vicinity of Piatykhatky. When talking about this map, the main losses the Ukrainians got somewhere in this area. There's probably they were trying to accumulate some forces to attack further, and of course along this N08 road. And as you can see one more time, the Ukrainians couldn't even bypass most of the fields, and they were destroyed in this small square between Novodanilovka, Piatykhatky, and Novopokrovka. And all those losses the Ukrainians had during the first phases of this counteroffensive operation from 4th of June till probably 15th of June or something like this. The Russians reported that they attacked Ukrainian reserves in Bilogorovka. The Russians managed to discover and destroy at least 3 commando squads in the vicinity of Mirne, Dorozhnyanka, and Gulay-Polye. I'll remind you that if you were following my previous videos, we discussed that Ukrainians during the previous days, during this phase of counteroffensive operation, managed to accumulate a very powerful attack first in the vicinity of Gulay-Polye. I'll remind you that there are forces of 32nd Mechanized, 33rd Mechanized, 102nd Defense, 65th Mechanized, 23rd Mechanized, 3rd Tank Brigade, and 64th Intelligence Battalion. So the Ukrainians are keeping these forces, trying not to involve them in battle, and as I understand, the main purpose of this phase is to attack further to the southeast of this bridgehead. Now we're moving to Vremevka tactical bridgehead. We also got a lot of very interesting updates from this territory. The Russians report that they bombed Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Livadne, in the vicinity of Urozhaine, and in the vicinity of Novodonetsk. And furthermore, the Russians published very interesting video how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions along this forest line. This video is geolocated. Basically, this video shows how the convoy of Ukrainian forces from Urozhaine and Starozhovo and Makarovka were heading in direction of road that connects Rovnopol with, let's say, mainland. And this video you can see how one of the Ukrainian truck got onto the minefields or probably was destroyed. There are some forces behind. There is like tank feast, a lot of vehicles, and all these forest line is under Russian control, and the Russians had just 1 tank and a significant number of infantry between the forest lines. During a very short battle, the Ukrainians were forced to step back and they lost some infantry. They didn't have a lot of losses, just 1 armored vehicles they lost and probably few soldiers. But the most important value of that video is that basically, according to that video, we see that the Russians had control over this forest line and basically over this forest line. So that means, and the video confirms that as a result of previous battles and fightings during the previous period of time, the Ukrainians established control over this part of bridgehead. So this is very interesting. But anyway, as you can see, the Russians still controls these forest lines that secure the road between Rovnopol and Staromayorsk. We understand the value of Rovnopol. The Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to capture the settlements, but all those attacks were repelled. And the only possible solution for the Ukrainians to cut the salient is to capture this forest line that currently is under complete Russian control. Now also the Russians published another photo and video photo satellite of this territory as well, and basically this map also show us the main areas of fightings, the main areas were exactly along the forest line that we just discussed and we just saw videos. And the thing is that from this perspective we see that Ukrainians are trying to attack this forest line and trying to destroy the Russian infantry and troops along this forest line. This one that we just watching video. And another area of very fierce battles is the area on the north of Urozhaine, this small like red square, and basically this is the area where the Ukrainians were trying to accumulate their forces. They were trying to attack in direction of Urozhaine. As I understand, the Ukrainians were completely defeated there, and basically this satellite photo confirms that as a result of previous fightings, the Ukrainians couldn't penetrate fields and couldn't capture these fields, according to Rybar, as Rybar reported us. So maybe he didn't have enough of information or something like this, but the photos confirms the real position among the fields and in the vicinity of these settlements. One more time, the Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings on these along these 3 bridgeheads like Piatykhatky, Bradley Square, and Vremevka tactical bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 200 soldiers and 30 armored vehicles, including 8 tanks. Now we are moving further to Marinka. The Russians just reported they managed to repel 2 attacks, one from Krasnogorovka in direction of the northern part of Marinka, and the second one somewhere in the fields between Pobeda and the recently captured Russian fortifications. When talking about the northern area, the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians in the vicinity of Pervomaiskaya, Vodyane, Veselaya and Krasnogorovka. All those attacks were repelled by the Russians. There were very heavy clashes, very fierce fightings, and the Russians reported that the Ukrainians, during all those attempts of storming these settlements around Donetsk, lost around 400 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles, including 1 tank. And this is very interesting because we understand the value of Vremevka tactical bridgehead of Orekhov, of these newly created brigades, but we see that the most fierce fightings are in the vicinity of Avdiivka and Marinka. So, of course, from one side, we see that media all over the world try to show us and to explain us that Zaporozhye is the most important part, and we saw that Ukrainians lost a lot of armored vehicles. But if we try to analyze the battles and the bridgeheads and try to analyze which bridgehead is more important based on losses, I'll give you my opinion. Avdiivka and Marinka are the most important bridgeheads all over the entire Ukraine. And the thing is that these are territories where the Ukrainians attacked, not the Russians. So basically, this bridgehead from Avdiivka to Marinka is much more important in comparison with Zaporozhye. And the thing is that if the Ukrainians are not able, let's say, to break the encirclement of Avdiivka, or if the Ukrainians are not able to push the Russians back from this bridgehead, of course, we understand, as we discussed, the Russians from their side can start a counter-offensive and to get the outskirts of Pokrovsk from this bridgehead, because this is a perfect operation for them. And this operation can solve a lot of issues from the Russian side. Now we are moving further to New York. The Russians report they destroy Ammo Depot 109th Territory Defense Brigade in this settlement. When talking about Artyomovsk, we haven't received any updates, just regular battles on the ground, the local artillery duels without any activities from both sides. The parties are trying to hold the bridgehead they have, and not today, and to survive another day. Now we are moving to the Kupiansk and Lyman front lines. The Ukrainians this morning reported that they launched another counter-offensive operation, and as a result of that operation, the Ukrainians are saying they managed to develop their attack in direction of Shipilovka. We haven't received any confirmation from the Russians or something like this, and even we haven't received any video confirmation, so basically that might be some kind of speculation or who knows. When talking about the Lyman front line, as we discussed, the Ukrainians have redeployed significant number of forces, including at least 3 artillery brigades like 26th, 45th and 40th. Furthermore, the Ukrainians have redeployed the force of 63rd Mechanized Brigade, 42nd, 58th, 67th, and furthermore there is 115th Mechanized, somewhere in the vicinity of Slaviansk. Probably this is some kind of strategical reserves. So the Ukrainians have accumulated a lot of infantry. Of course, there are not so many mechanized brigades, and we can understand this because this area is basically forest, and if the Ukrainians want to storm Kreminna, they don't need tanks because they need to move along forest, and for these purposes it's better to have different type of weapon in comparison with just tanks and armored vehicles. And of course, there are 25th and 66th mechanized. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 135 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 4 artillery systems. The level of losses is very high, and the level of losses is high for the 3rd day in a row. We start seeing this level of losses from 19th of June. It was 105 soldiers, yesterday 100 soldiers, and today 135. So we see that the level increases from day to day. And the thing is that I'll remind you that the length of this front line is shorter in comparison with Zaporozhye and with Donetsk, and if we will recalculate the level of losses based on the length of the front line, I believe that the level of losses on this front line even higher in comparison with Zaporozhye. Of course, there are still a lot of work to reach the level of, let's say, Donetsk front line, but that front line is very big. Don't forget that Donetsk is at least 3 settlements like Marinka, Avdiivka, and Artyomovsk, where we can find very heavy clashes. And when talking about this area, there is just one active zone, somewhere between Kreminna and this Dibrova, this forest, and the clashes there are very heavy. And probably the destiny of the next few months is also can be resolved in this area as well. Now we're moving further to Kupiansk front line. There are no changes. The level of losses is the same. The Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers. The regular activity, artillery duels. The Russians published another interesting video how they were using new type of weapon somewhere in the Kupiansk front line, attacking the Ukrainian positions among the forest lines. Somewhere the as you can see, just a picture, another geolocated piece of information, nothing more. The Ukrainians lost during the day 40 soldiers and 3 armored vehicles. And we will finish with the situation on the ground with the Kherson front line. And today we got very interesting update. For example, the Russian sources published a very interesting video. This is the bridge, and the Russians are saying that this is Antonov Bridge, the Antonov Bridge that was destroyed by the Ukrainians and the Russians during the retreat operation. And basically the Russians are saying that this video was made on the Russian side of this territory, and basically that video was made somewhere here. So we need to wait more confirmation, but probably, and there is a very high chances that Ukrainians managed to cross the Dnipro River before the Russians and to capture Antonov Bridge at the Russian side and to establish their first positions. I'm not saying that this is real correct information. We need to wait more. Maybe this is speculation or another like intelligence media operation from Ukrainian special forces. But anyway, this piece of information is very interesting. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours of artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 4 artillery systems. The level also has been a little bit increased. And basically that situation is connected that the water has almost left this territory, and the parties start regaining and returning their lost positions during the flooding of this territory. Also, from international updates, the most interesting, I believe, comes from United States of America. And as you know, today the Joe Biden, the president of United States of America, called a Chinese President Xi as dictator. Of course, a few days ago there was a meeting between Antony Blinken and with Comrade Xi, but as you can see, today the Joe Biden, no matter the good talks and good notes that were made after the meeting between Blinken and Comrade Xi, we see that today he or ruined everything, or the negotiations was too bad, so there's nothing even to add and talk about. So the situation between United States of America and China, we see got worse, and of course this is very nice for the Russians during the entire situation in Ukraine. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.